A family vacation at a luxury resort quickly turns into a nightmare when racist police officers decide they do not belong. The father is unjustly handcuffed in front of his family, unaware that the man they are detaining is an FBI agent. What happens when the truth comes out? Subscribe to the channel and follow to see how this story unfolds. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The Parker family had been looking forward to this vacation for months. Ethan Parker, a veteran FBI agent, rarely had the time to enjoy peaceful moments with his family. His job demanded that he always be ready, which often brought stress into his home life. Lena, his wife, a renowned lawyer with a passion for justice, fought for the rights of underserved communities. Their lives were always busy, but this time they both decided to put work aside to spend time together and with their children. The vacation took place at a luxurious beachside resort, where gentle waves met the shore and the sky stretched clear and blue. Ethan reclined on a sun lounger by the pool, wearing sunglasses and shorts, enjoying the fresh air and the taste of freedom he so rarely experienced. At that moment all the pressures seemed to disappear, leaving only a sense of lightness. Lena sat beside him, absorbed in a novel she had not had time to finish for weeks. She looked elegant and calm, but deep down, Lena knew she needed this break to momentarily forget the worries of her job. Their two children, Jackson and Emily, played in the shallow end of the pool. Jackson, a tall and mature-looking 12-year-old, constantly challenged his swimming speed against his 7-year-old sister Emily, a sweet girl with curly brown hair and a radiant smile. Both kids were laughing, their joy echoing through the quiet resort, bringing a sense of contentment to Ethan. Watching these moments, he felt the peace he'd been seeking for so long. It was a rare occasion where he felt truly present for his family, without worrying about emergency tasks or unsolved cases. However, not everything was as perfect as it seemed. As Ethan reached for a cold drink on the table beside him, he noticed a security guard approaching from a distance. The man wore a dark polo shirt, stood tall and exuded authority. Though his face remained polite, there was clear suspicion and discomfort in his eyes. He stepped forward and stopped in front of the Parker family. "Excuse me, sir," the guard said, his voice firm and somewhat cold. "I need to verify that you're a guest here." Ethan sat up slowly, lowered his sunglasses, and looked the man in the eye. "I am a guest here," he responded calmly. Without hesitation, Lena put down her book, glancing at Ethan, sensing something was off. This was not the first time they had been treated this way, but each time it brought a fresh wave of wariness. The guard smirked, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "It's just procedure. I need to know your room number," Ethan replied, still calm. "We're in room 305. We arrived yesterday." The guard nodded but did not leave. "I'll need to confirm with the front desk. I hope you understand this is policy." Lena sat up straight, her sharp eyes quickly catching the issue. She looked at Ethan, and they both understood what was happening. "Is there a problem?" Lena asked, her tone polite but firm. The guard hesitated slightly, but maintained his professional tone. "No problem, ma'am. It's just routine." Ethan sighed. He was all too familiar with these procedures. This was not the first time he and his family had been treated differently. In upscale places he turned, Alina speaking softly, Let them check. Lena gave him a knowing look. But she could not hide her frustration, even though this was supposed to be a family vacation. They both knew the atmosphere had shifted. As the guard walked away, Ethan tried to stay calm, hoping this would soon be over. But deep down he knew this was just the beginning of a tense series of events. Ethan and Lena attempted to relax, but the joyful atmosphere of the vacation had been completely shattered. Lena put her book down, her eyes now focused on the guard, who was returning with a colleague. Both men appeared more serious, walking quickly toward the family. With none of the initial politeness, Lena sat upright, her sharp eyes keen, while Ethan felt the tension tightening around them. "Sir," the first guard began, his tone now more forceful, as if he had already made up his mind. "We need you and your family to leave the pool area until we confirm your information with the front desk." Ethan sat up slowly, his gaze never leaving the guard. "As I've said, we're in room 305. If you want to confirm, just call the front desk. There's no need to kick us out." His voice remained calm, though the anger was rising within. Lena stood up next, unable to hide her irritation. "I do not understand the reason. We've answered all your questions. Why are you asking us to leave?" Her voice was clearer, now sharper, full of protest. The guard avoided Lena's eyes, trying to maintain his professionalism. As he addressed Ethan again, "We've had some issues recently with non-guests sneaking into the pool area. This is just a procedure to protect the resort's property. It's a policy we have to follow," he said, his tone cold and distant. Lena's brow furrowed, clearly sensing the injustice. She stepped forward, her voice even sharper. "What's the real issue here? We've clearly stated our room number, and you're still questioning us. Is it because we look different from the other people here? Is your policy applied to everyone, or just to families like ours?" The guard hesitated, but still tried to keep his stern expression. "Ma'am, it's not what you think. We're just ensuring the resort's security," he replied, but his discomfort was evident in his tone. Ethan placed a hand on Lena's shoulder, trying to calm the growing fury within her. He understood her feelings all too well, because he was suppressing the same anger. He had seen and experienced many similar situations, but each time left him with fresh frustration. It was not just the suspicion from strangers' eyes, but the pain of being judged by appearance. "It's okay, Lena," Ethan said softly, trying to keep things under control. "Let them check with the front desk." However, a younger guard with a confident stance stepped forward, crossing his arms over his chest and speaking in a challenging tone. "We've had a lot of people sneaking in here who are not guests. Do not think we're targeting your family. This is just our job." That statement infuriated Lena. She stepped directly in front of the young guard, no longer able to maintain her calm. "Not personal, then why are you pushing us so hard? You're scaring my children and insulting us over a procedure you're using as an excuse," Lena said, her voice sharp, her eyes blazing with anger. Ethan, trying to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control, spoke up again, his tone still calm but more assertive. "We've answered all your questions. If you want to verify, call the front desk. There's no need to escalate this." His voice remained steady, but the frustration in his eyes was unmistakable. The younger guard smirked slightly, but it was a mocking smile. "We're just doing our job, ma'am," he shrugged. "If you have a problem, you can talk to our manager." Lena locked eyes with the guard, not backing down. She was used to confrontations like this in the courtroom, but this time she was not a lawyer defending someone else. She was a wife, a mother, and she was not going to let her family be treated like this. Before Lena could say anything else, Ethan gently pulled her back, looking directly at the guard. "You've asked us for our room number, and we've answered. We're not leaving. You can check with the front desk, but I will not allow you to keep harassing my family." Like this, the tension was thicker than ever. Jackson and Emily, who had been playing happily just moments before, were now standing still, their eyes filled with worry. Jackson moved closer to Ethan, his face confused. "Dad, what's going on?" Ethan bent down, gently placing a hand on his son's shoulder, trying to smile reassuringly. "It's nothing, son. Just a little misunderstanding. Go back and play with Emily. I'll handle this." But deep inside, he knew the situation could escalate at any moment. If not handled carefully, the original guard seemed uneasy as the tension built, glancing nervously at the other guests around the pool. Some were starting to take notice, looking over at the Parker family. A few had even taken out their phones, recording the scene, yet no one intervened. They just watched from afar. "All right, I'll check with the front desk right away," the first guard said, trying to maintain his professionalism, but clearly losing confidence. "Please wait here." Ethan sighed, holding back the frustration and exhaustion, but still keeping a calm exterior. Lena, however, was different. Her sharp eyes remained locked on the two guards, unwilling to let anything slip by. Within minutes, the situation worsened when a group of guards returned, this time accompanied by two local police officers. They arrived with stern faces, marching directly toward the Parker family. The relaxed atmosphere around the pool turned tense. Guests nearby started to stop what they were doing, some whispering while others continued recording the scene on their phones. A tall police officer leading the group approached Ethan with a firm voice. "We received a report of an incident here. I need to see your identification." Even though Ethan was used to tense situations in his line of work, a wave of anger surged in his chest. He stood up slowly, facing the officer, not showing any signs of worry on his face. "I've already explained to the security guards. My family is here as legitimate guests. We're staying in room 305. Ethan said clearly. "I'm Ethan Parker, an FBI agent, and we've done nothing wrong." The officer did not seem surprised or respectful when Ethan mentioned he was an FBI agent. Instead, he simply nodded and interrupted. "Hand over your ID immediately." Lena shot to her feet, her eyes flashing with fury. "My husband just told you he's an FBI agent. You have no legitimate reason to harass us like this," she said, her voice filled with authority and determination. "You have no right to treat us like intruders, especially in front of our children." The officer did not bother looking at Lena. His focus remained solely on Ethan. His hand hovered near his belt, where his handcuffs dangled. "Hand over your aid now, or we'll have to follow protocol." Ethan kept his composure, well aware of how quickly situations like this could escalate into violence. He slowly pulled out his wallet, took out his FBI badge and ID, and handed them to the officer. "Here's my ID," he said, his voice firm but not confrontational. The officer took the badge, examined it for a few seconds, then handed it back with a smear. "I do not care about this badge. I need real identification. Not something you can buy from a souvenir shop." Lena clenched her fists, her breath quickening in her growing rage. "What did you just say?" she nearly shouted. But Ethan quickly placed his hand on her shoulder, calming her. "Stay calm, Lena," he said softly, though inside his own fury was boiling. The officer continued to stare at Ethan, his eyes filled with contempt. "I will not ask again. Provide valid ID or we'll take further action." Ethan knew exactly what was coming next. If he did not comply, he had seen too many situations like this before. With no other choice, he took out his driver's license and handed it to the officer. "Here, my valid ID," he said, his tone now colder. The officer glanced at the license, then tossed it back to Ethan with disrespect. "We still have not gotten any confirmation from the hotel, so until we do, I'm asking you and your family to leave this area." Lena could not take it any longer. She stepped toward the officer, her voice sharp and unyielding enough. "We are guests here, and we're not going anywhere. If you continue harassing my family, I will make sure you pay for this. What you're doing is entirely unlawful, and I will bring this issue to the public." The officer stood still, his eyes gleaming with defiance. "Who do you think you are, threatening us like that?" Lena stood tall, facing the officer without a hint of fear. "I'm a lawyer and my husband is a federal agent. You've made a grave mistake by treating us like this, and I will not let this go unnoticed." A tense silence hung over the pool area. People around began paying even more attention, whispers spreading everywhere. A few guests had already started filming from afar, and the air became more suffocating with tension. Ethan glanced at Lena, his heart heavy with concern for his family's safety. The situation was spiraling out of control, and he knew that one wrong move could make everything worse, beyond repair. Seconds later, the younger officer, the one who had been challenging them from the start, stepped forward, pulling out his handcuffs and moving toward Ethan. "Put your hands behind your back, or we'll use force." Ethan remained still, his eyes now filled with resolve and calmness. "You're making a big mistake," he said, his voice soft but filled with a quiet danger. He stood there, staring directly into the eyes of the officer, approaching with the cuffs. In that moment, like an unstoppable flood, memories from the past rushed back, overwhelming his mind. Ethan remembered his early days as a new FBI agent. He had gone through many dangerous situations, facing off with dangerous criminals, and keeping his mind sharp in the tensest moments. But never had he felt so powerless as he did now. All his years of service to his country, of protecting national security, suddenly felt insignificant compared to the injustice his family was now enduring. A vivid image surfaced in his mind. A case from 5 years ago, when he had led an investigation into police brutality. Back then, Ethan had been the lead investigator in a case where the police had unjustly shot and killed an unarmed black youth. He had interviewed dozens of witnesses, reviewed hundreds of pieces of evidence, and uncovered a harsh truth. What had happened was not a mistake, but a systematic abuse of power. Ethan had fought to bring justice for the victim, but he never imagined that one day he would be the one falling victim to that very system. He looked over at Lena, his wife, who had always stood firm in every legal battle she took on. Lena had always been proud of her work, fighting for the rights of the underprivileged and marginalized communities. But today, she was not the lawyer defending someone else. She was the wife protecting her husband. And that pained Ethan more than anything. He did not want Lena to go through this. Nor did he want their children to witness a scene that should never happen. As the officer raised the cuffs, ready to lock them around Ethan's wrists, he remembered the many times he had arrested actual dangerous criminals throughout his career. He had taken down drug traffickers and domestic terrorists, but now here he was, a man who had worked tirelessly to protect his country, being treated like a criminal simply because of his appearance and unjust suspicion. Other painful memories flooded in. Ethan recalled the first time he and Lena had to explain racism to Jackson. At the time, Jackson was only 10 years old, but he had noticed how people treated their family differently. "Why do they keep looking at us like that?" Jackson had asked, his eyes full of confusion. Ethan had sat him down, trying to explain as simply as possible. But the bitterness in his heart had been hard to hide. He knew that no matter what he said, he could not protect his son from the harsh reality forever. Now Jackson was older, but Ethan could still see the confusion and worry on his son's face. The boy stood nearby, his wide eyes trying to make sense of what was happening. Emily, Ethan's younger daughter, clung tightly to her mother, her eyes brimming with tears. Fear filled the eyes of both children, and Ethan felt his heart tighten. He could not allow his children to grow up with the image of their father in handcuffs, treated like a criminal. In those moments, Ethan also thought of his black colleagues in the FBI. He had heard many stories from them about being pulled over by the police just because they did not look right in the cars they drove, or being suspected in upscale stores simply because of the color of their skin. When Ethan had heard these stories, he always believed he could make a difference, that his work could help create a more just society. But now here he was, facing the very thing he had always thought he could fight against. Ethan took a deep breath, telling himself to stay calm. He had been through tougher situations than this, but never had he felt so deeply hurt, not physically but emotionally. He knew that if he resisted or showed any signs of non-compliance, this situation would escalate quickly, and that could put his family in danger. The young officer, unaware of the storm of thoughts swirling in Ethan's mind, saw only a black man standing before him. His eyes gleamed with defiance, as if waiting for Ethan to resist so he could use force or right. Ethan said calmly, placing his hands behind his back. There was no sign of surrender in his eyes, only a determination to remain composed for his family. He felt the cold metal of the cuffs as they locked around his wrist, and at the same time he saw the panic in Emily's eyes, her choked sobs filling his ears. Jackson stood frozen, his face hardening, but his eyes filled with confusion and hurt. Ethan tried to reassure his children with a gentle look, but inside the flames of anger burned fiercely. He knew that his endurance today was for his family, but he vowed that this was not the end. He might be silent today, but what happened afterward would not be met with silence. When the officers snapped the cuffs onto Ethan's wrists, Lena felt a surge of electricity shoot through her, awakening all the anger that had been simmering for so long. The image of her husband, a man who had stood strong against dangerous criminals, now being treated like a common criminal, made her blood boil. Lena had kept quiet long enough. Now she no longer wanted to stay calm. She strode quickly toward the officer holding Ethan, her eyes blazing with fury. "That's enough," Lena shouted, her voice echoing across the pool area. The onlookers who had been quietly observing now focused entirely on her, their phones still recording. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Do you realize you're cuffing a federal agent?" And the young officer with the cuffs on his hands looked up, his eyes flashing with defiance and annoyance. "Mom, if you do not step back, we'll have to detain you as well." Lena stepped even closer, showing no sign of stopping. "Detain me? You have no right to detain me. Just for standing up for my family. You're treating my husband like a criminal in front of our children, and I will not let this go." The older officer, the one who had maintained a cold expression throughout, stepped forward to block Lena. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job. Your husband was not complying with our request." Lena let out a cold, bitter laugh. "Doing your job is your job. To harass a legal family, to arrest an innocent man, just because of the color of his skin. I'll show you what justice looks like. I'm a lawyer and I know our rights. The moment you put your hands on my husband without a legitimate reason, you broke the law." The older officer, who seemed to sense that the situation was spiraling out of control, glanced nervously at the growing crowd. Some of the guests had begun filming more openly, and their disapproving murmurs filled the air. He knew that if this continued, it would quickly go viral on social media. But the young, hot-headed officer still did not seem to grasp the seriousness of the situation. He maintained his defiant stance. "We have the right to ask for valid identification." He did not comply right away, and that's enough for us to act. Lena could not hold back anymore. She stepped directly in front of the young officer, her eyes locking onto his with no fear. "I told you clearly that my husband is a federal agent, and you ignored that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Not only have you broken the law, but you've also humiliated us and traumatized my children." Jackson, standing nearby with wide eyes, was struggling to understand everything happening around him. Emily, hiding behind her brother, was teary-eyed, and in that moment, Lena realized that her anger was not just for Ethan, but for their children as well. They did not deserve to witness their father being unjustly handcuffed like this, nor did they deserve to grow up with the fear that their parents could be taken away simply because of a different skin color. "You think I'll stay silent while my husband is treated like this?" Lena continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You think I'll stand by while my children endure this humiliation? I will do everything to bring this situation to light, and you will pay for what you've done." The crowd around them grew louder, their whispers more insistent. Some tourists filming the scene no longer remained silent. They began talking openly about the injustice happening before their eyes. Lena could feel that she was gaining the support of the onlookers, and that only fueled her resolve. The young officer still did not seem to understand the gravity of the situation, but the older officer was becoming more worried. He glanced around, seeing the phones held high in the disapproving looks from the crowd, then turned back to Ethan, still in handcuffs but strangely calm. He knew that if this was not handled properly, the situation could explode in a matter of hours. On social media, I suggest you calm down, ma'am, or will be forced to take stronger action. The younger officer threatened, but his voice had lost some of its initial confidence. Lena stood tall, her eyes piercing through him, as if she were challenging the entire world. I am completely calm, but if you do not release my husband right now, I will turn this into your worst nightmare. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. The crowd grew silent, eyes focused intently on the standoff. Lena and the officer stood still, her steely gaze meeting the growing unease on his face. The older officer, sensing the danger of the situation, turned back to his team and quietly ordered, "That's enough, release him." The young officer hesitated for a few seconds, then finally reluctantly took out the key and unlocked the cuffs from Ethan's wrist. As the cuffs clicked open, Ethan raised his hands, rubbing his wrists, still maintaining his calm demeanor. But Lena knew the anger in him was simmering. "Prepare yourselves to answer for every action you've taken," Lena said firmly, her eyes never leaving the officers. As the handcuffs fell from Ethan's wrists, it was not just Lena who sighed in relief, but Jackson and Emily, their 2 children, also felt the shift in the atmosphere. But the moment did not bring immediate safety. Instead, confusion and unease hung over the children, something that neither them nor Lena could miss. Jackson, with his wide, confused eyes, could not believe what he had just witnessed. This was his strong, proud father, a federal agent whom he admired and trusted completely. But now the boy had just seen his father handcuffed like a criminal, treated with disrespect for no reason. In his young mind, Jackson was trying to understand why this was happening. Should he be afraid it might happen again? What would he do if it did? Jackson walked over to Ethan, his eyes filled with disappointment and confusion. "Dad, why did they do that to you? You did not do anything wrong." His voice trembled, struggling to contain the anger and hurt inside. Ethan knelt down to be on eye level with Jackson, searching for the right words to explain, without causing his son more pain. "Jackson, sometimes people do not understand others, and they act on wrong assumptions," Ethan said softly, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "But what's important is that we do not let those people define us or our family. I did not do anything wrong, and will make sure that those who did will face the consequences." Jackson still could not fully grasp it. He lowered his head, his eyes fixed on the ground, his lips tightly pressed together, as he thought about what his father had just said. Meanwhile, Lina stood just behind them, her eyes carefully watching both father and son. She knew Jackson had been deeply affected by what had just happened, and she knew that from now on, the boy would no longer see the world with the same innocent eyes. Emily, their younger daughter, was still clinging to her mother, her tears streaming down her face. "Mommy, is Daddy okay? Did they hurt him?" Her small voice trembled, soft but full of fear. Her tiny hands were still gripping her mother's, seeking protection from a world that had suddenly become too strange and terrifying. Lena knelt beside Emily, pulling her daughter into a tight hug, stroking her curly hair. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said in the gentlest voice she could muster, though her own anger still burned inside. "Daddy's fine, and we'll get through this together." Emily clung tightly to her mother, but Lena could feel the trembling in her daughter's small body. The images she had just witnessed would undoubtedly leave a scar on the little girl's heart. Lena's heart ached, as she thought about what her daughter had to endure. Something no child should ever have to see. Ethan saw the panic in Emily's eyes, and in that moment his heart broke. He had always wanted to protect his family from situations like this, but today he had been dragged into this injustice and made his children witness it. There was no pain greater for a father than seeing his children afraid because of things beyond his control. The crowd around them continued to murmur, the whispers growing louder. A few guests kept filming, while others watched with shocked and sympathetic expressions. The tension of the situation had not fully dissipated, but now it was replaced by a sense of emptiness and exhaustion. In the Parker family, Lena stood up, turning to the group of officers still standing nearby. Her voice was no longer filled with the anger from before, but with a determined resolve. What you've done is unforgivable, and I will not let you walk away from this without facing the consequences. We will see justice. Ethan, though wary, stood tall, his eyes locked on the young officer who had unjustly cuffed him. We will not just fight for our own justice, he said firmly, his voice steady but full of strength. We'll fight for everyone else who's had to endure this kind of discrimination. The older officer, who had hesitated earlier, now stood silent, his head lowered. He knew that the situation had spun out of control, and the consequences would not be easily erased. The looks from the crowd, the phone still recording, and Lena's words of warning had clearly made him realize how serious the situation had become. Jackson and Emily, still too young to fully understand everything, but old enough to feel the injustice and pain their family had just gone through, would carry this memory with them for a long time. Ethan, with a heavy heart, knew that he was not the only one who would have to face the wounds from this incident, but he also knew that no matter what, he would stand up to protect them and ensure that this injustice would not be repeated. Lena turned Ethan, her eyes filled with determination. We will not stop here, we'll fight this all the way. She whispered. Yes, we will not stop. Ethan nodded, his eyes reflecting the same resolve. Lena stood tall, her gaze sweeping over the officers and resort staff, no longer hesitating or afraid. Now all she could think about was how to bring this incident into the public light. They could not let this go, and they certainly would not allow what had happened to them to go unpunished. She pulled her phone from her pocket and immediately called a colleague at her law office. Lena was a well-known attorney, specializing in defending the rights of individuals and at underserved communities. She had faced cases of discrimination and abuse of power like this before, but never thought her own family would become victims. Her voice was firm as she began, briefly describing the situation to her colleague, asking them to start preparing the legal groundwork for the case. Ella, I need you to start gathering everything from this case right away, Lena said over the phone. Pacing around the pool area, we were just harassed by the police at the resort without any legal reason. Ethan was handcuffed in front of our kids. I want to file a lawsuit against both the police and the resort. While Lena spoke with her colleague, the older officer, who had ordered the handcuffs removed from Ethan, stepped forward, trying to de-escalate the situation. Ma'am, he said, his tone less rigid than before, I understand this has been an unpleasant situation, and we will be conducting an internal investigation. I hope you can calm down and cooperate, so we can resolve this peacefully. Lena looked at him, her eyes filled with contempt. You've crossed a line, she replied, her voice cold. Your officers have humiliated and traumatized my family. There's no peace after what you've done. You will be held accountable in court, and we will not stop until this injustice is made public. All right, she ended the phone call and turned back to face the officer, her expression still resolute. You can prepare for a public lawsuit. Everything that happened here has been recorded, and I will make sure justice is served. The officer could not hide the worry on his face. As he glanced around at the crowd still watching, he knew Lena was not just making empty threats. With everything that had happened, this was sure to turn into a major case. If not handled properly, the onlookers with their phones still recording were not just witnesses. They were the tools that would spread this story far and wide. Meanwhile, Ethan, though now freed from the cuffs, did not take his eyes off the young officer who had cuffed him. He knew all too well that in this system, people like that officer often found ways to protect each other. Abuse of power like this was often covered up or swept aside. But this time, Ethan was not going to let that happen. His family had suffered too much, and he would do everything he could to protect them from further injustice. We're not just fighting for our own justice, Ethan said to the older officer, his voice calm but strong. We're doing this for everyone else who's ever had to face discrimination like this. The older officer tried to keep his composure, but it was clear he was anxious about what was coming next. I'll report this up the chain and request an internal investigation, he said, but his words seemed hollow to the Parker family. Lena headed toward the hotel reception desk. She was now clear about her next target: the resort management. This resort had directly called the police and participated in the harassment of her family, and they too would have to face the legal consequences. We'd like to speak with the manager immediately, Lena said firmly to the receptionist, her voice leaving no room for refusal. The receptionist, flustered, quickly called the manager. Within minutes, a middle-aged man with a worried expression appeared. He bowed slightly to Lena and Ethan, but his eyes could not hide his confusion. Hello, I'm the manager of the resort. I understand there's been an incident, and I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. Lena wasted no time stepping forward, cutting him off before he could say more. This was not a misunderstanding. This was blatant discrimination, and you'll be held responsible for calling the police to harass us without any legitimate reason. I want to know what policy of this resort allowed you to treat us this way. The resort manager stammered, searching for an explanation, but under Lena's sharp gaze and the watching crowd, his words became meaningless. We're truly sorry for this. We'll conduct a review to ensure that incidents like this never happen again. Lena was not moved. Sorry is not enough. We'll be filing a public lawsuit, and you'll have to face the consequences. I'll make sure this incident is brought to justice, and what happened to my family will not be forgotten. Ethan stood beside Lena, looking at the manager with a cold expression. They both knew they were in for a long legal battle, but they also knew they would not be alone. Just then the hotel door swung open, and a group of people walked in. At the head was a man in a police uniform, his posture authoritative, his face unreadable. It was Deputy Chief Paulson. a familiar figure from local press conferences and public events held by the police. Department Ethan recognized him immediately. The man who held more power than the officers, who had harassed his family at the pool. Deputy Chief Paulson strode quickly toward the group, his eyes scanning the young officers and the resort manager, who stood awkwardly near Lena and Ethan. "I'm Deputy Chief Paulson. I've been briefed on the situation, and I want to hear clearly what happened," he said, his voice firm but professional. His eyes landed on Ethan, and there was no surprise in them. When he realized the man standing before him was an FBI agent, Ethan stepped forward, calmly facing the deputy chief. "I'm Ethan Parker, an FBI agent. My family was unjustly harassed by your officers, and I was handcuffed in front of my wife and children for no reason other than misplaced assumptions. We're legitimate guests at this resort, and I demand an explanation for the discriminatory actions taken against us." Paulson nodded, listening seriously. He turned to the older officer, who had been present from the beginning, standing nervously with his younger colleagues. "Is this accurate?" Paulson asked, his tone leaving no room for excuses. The older officer hesitated, trying to maintain his composure. "Deputy Chief, we were just following procedure, because we could not immediately verify Mr. Parker's information. We did not intend to cause harm or disrespect." But before the officer could finish, Paulson interrupted, his eyes narrowing with displeasure. "Procedure is one thing, but treating a legitimate family like this, especially when you knew they were guests, is another." He turned back to face Ethan and Lena, his tone becoming more serious. "I apologize for what happened. We'll launch an immediate investigation, and those involved in this incident will be held accountable. This is not just a matter of police conduct. It's about the honor of the entire department." Lena, standing beside Ethan, looked directly at Paulson, unmoved by the formal apology. "An apology does not erase the humiliation we just experienced. This is not the first time such discriminatory actions have happened. You say you'll investigate, but I want concrete plans and timelines. I'm not letting this end with empty promises." Paulson nodded, his face remaining unchanged. "I understand, ma'am. We'll work with our internal affairs unit to conduct an open and transparent investigation. I'll personally oversee it, and all parties involved will be questioned. If there are violations, they will face the law." Ethan studied Paulson carefully, searching for signs of sincerity. He had heard many promises from the system. He had served for years, but now, as a victim of that very system, he was not sure he could trust its transparency anymore. However, he knew the key now was to keep the pressure on. "That's not enough," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I want to make sure this incident does not get swept under the rug, that the officers who abuse their power are held accountable, and beyond that, I'll be taking this matter to higher authorities, not just within the police department, but at the federal level." Paulson nodded, his eyes flickering briefly, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. "I assure you, everything will be handled properly and fairly, and if you have any evidence or statements, I encourage you to cooperate to ensure justice is served." Lena glanced at Ethan, then turned back to Paulson. "We have plenty of evidence. Everything has been recorded by the people around us, and I will not hesitate to use it if necessary. Both this resort and your police department will answer to the law." Paulson did not argue. He understood that the Parker family was not going to be easily intimidated or placated with promises. I'll await your information. In the meantime, I suggest the officers involved report immediately on their actions. Thank you for bringing clarity to the situation, Paulson said before turning to the young officer, his tone growing colder. Landon, get inside and report everything that's happened. The young officer Landon, who had cuffed Ethan without cause, no longer carried the defiant look from earlier. He glanced quickly at Ethan and Lena before lowering his head and silently walking back inside the hotel to follow his superior's orders. As Paulson ordered the officers to withdraw, the tension around the pool area remained palpable. Ethan and Lena stood there, with the eyes of the crowd still watching. People whispered to one another. The filming had stopped, but their concern and anger had not subsided. They knew the story was not over, and the truth would soon come to light. Ethan looked at Lena, a feeling of both relief and exhaustion washing over him. We've won the first round, he said softly, his voice filled with determination. Yes, but we have a long way to go. Lena nodded, her eyes still full of resolve. Ethan knew she was right. This incident would not end with Deputy Chief Paulson's promises or the officers retreating from the scene. This was just the beginning of a long fight for justice, ensuring that no one else would have to go through what they did. The silent crowd around them and the recording phones only strengthened Ethan and Lena's resolve. The couple turned back to their children. Jackson still looked confused, but his eyes now held admiration for the strength with which his parents faced the injustice. Emily, still clinging to her mother, had stopped crying, but her eyes still showed traces of fear. Lena hugged both children tightly, her voice soft but strong. We got through this together, she said, gently stroking Emily's hair, and no one will be allowed to treat us like that again. Ethan stood beside them, his eyes tender as he looked at his children, but he could not hide the quiet determination within him. He knew that this battle was not just for his family, but for everyone else who had faced similar injustice. It was time to stand up, not just to protect his own, but to protect others as well. As they prepared to leave the pool area, the resort manager, who had witnessed the entire scene, hurried over looking flustered. Mia and Mr. Parker, we are truly sorry for what happened. We never intended for this, and we will take full responsibility for it, he said, his voice filled with worry. The resort will fully compensate your entire stay, and will ensure that no further incidents like this happen. Lena, unmoved by the apology and the offer of compensation, responded coldly. Money cannot erase what we've been through. We do not need a free vacation. We need justice, and we'll make sure you face it. The resort manager bowed his head, saying nothing more, realizing there was nothing he could do to ease the righteous anger of the Parker family. As he turned away, Lena looked at Ethan and gave him a slight nod. They had a clear plan now, and nothing would make them back down. As they walked toward the front desk to leave the resort, Jackson tugged on Ethan's shirt, his voice filled with curiosity and a hint of worry. Dad, what are we going to do now? Will everything be okay? Ethan knelt down, placing a hand on his son's shoulder, and smiled softly but firmly. We're going to fight, Jackson. Everything will be okay because we will not give up. We're going to make the world fair. not just for our family but for everyone. Lina stood beside him, her eyes filled with pride, as she looked at Ethan and their children. That's right, we'll make sure those responsible pay for what they've done, and we will not stop until justice is served. With those words, the Parker family walked out of the resort hand in hand, stronger and more united than ever. They knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but they also knew they were not alone in this fight. With Lena's legal expertise, Ethan's determination, and the unbreakable love of their family, they would continue their battle for justice. The fight may not be over, but they were ready for whatever lay ahead. And this time they knew that injustice and discrimination would not prevail. The Parker family's journey is not just a story about confronting injustice, but a testament to the courage and determination to stand up against discrimination, to protect the rights of oneself and others. Through their story, we are reminded that justice does not come from silence. Sometimes we must rise and fight for the truth, not just for ourselves but for a better, fairer society for everyone. The challenges the Parker family faced serve as a reminder to all of us. When faced with injustice, do not be afraid to speak out. Always believe in the power of unity and family love. With perseverance and courage, we can change the future, creating a world where everyone is treated equally, regardless of race, gender, or background. If you found this story meaningful and want to help us spread these important values, please subscribe to our channel so you will not miss the next inspirational story. Together we can build a strong community filled with compassion and a sense of justice.